privilege to have time together and to just hear from three phenomenal leaders in our community and just members of Branksome Hall. And I look forward to the conversation, and it really is a conversation. So I have a set of questions here that's going to guide us, and it asks a little bit about your beliefs around schooling and education, your beliefs around leadership and activism, your own identity and how that informs your practices, and also just your advice for us at Branksome Hall and for various people in this world. So I look forward to just walking you through some of the questions over this time together. And the first one is very easy. It's just asks you to introduce yourself, your position or role at this time, and if you're a past graduate of Branksome, when you were with us.
Okay, well, first of all, good afternoon to the Branksome community. My name is C.K. PURKS Hoffler. I graduated from Branksome in 1980. I'm originally from Buffalo, New York. I then went to school at Smith College and then Georgetown Law School. I've been a lawyer for 33 years, which is amazing. And I do civil rights work, commercial litigation, opioid litigation, tobacco litigation. I'm a trial lawyer by trade. And what can I say? I love Branksome. Had a great experience at Branksome. A social justice lawyer as well. I do I'm president of the National Bar Association, and I represent the interests of 66,000 plus African-American lawyers, judges, law students, and jurists. So I'm also the chair of the board, the first woman chair of the board of the Rainbow Push Coalition. That's Reverend Jesse Jackson's organization. And I have represented Reverend Jesse Jackson as a lawyer for 32 of my 33 years. So that's just my background. It's been a long time since I've connected with the Branksome community, and I'm so delighted to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you. And Torie?
Yes, so hello everyone. My name is Torie Williams. I graduated in 2017. I currently attend McGill University for Honors Economics, International Development, and French. During my time at McGill, I have been the Vice President of Events of McGill Women in Leadership, as well as Social Coordinator and then President of the Black Students Network. And during my time at Branksome, I was quite involved, but I'll just mention that I was student government prefect in my final year. I'm really excited to be here. I've really enjoyed working with Branksome over the past few months, and yeah, just really excited to hear the conversation that we're about to have.
Thank you, Torie. And then Maria?
Hi everyone, my name is Maria. I'm in grade 11, so I'm class of 2022. So I'm pretty involved at Branksome. I do soccer, I do debate, Model United Nations, but my leadership role for this year is the Diversity Council Student Life Representative. So I'm going to be working with the student government, the administration, and also the student body, just to take everyone's suggestions and see how we can make the Branksome community more welcoming for everyone.
Thanks. This is a real privilege to be together. And I want to start off with a little bit about yourselves. And what is one thing about yourself that very few people know, or something that you would like to share about yourself?
Well, I'm a mother of 2 teenage boys. So I've been a lawyer for 33 years. And so for me to have 2 teenage boys, that means I started late in life. I think my kids are probably around the same age as Maria. And so so that's something that perhaps people don't quite realize, because most of my peers from law school, for instance, their kids are in graduate school or they already are grandparents. And of course, mine are just a little bit out of diapers. At least that's how I feel. So that's something about me that many people don't realize. And I have to tell you, many times I do what I do and I say what I say, and I take on the challenges so that my children can live. I live in the United States, in the Atlanta metropolitan area. It is not lost on anyone, some of the challenges that young Black men face. And so when I say that I do what I do so that my kids may live, I recognize that if my children are stopped by the police, as they were recently, when driving to school, that there's a good likelihood that they will not come out from that experience unscathed.
And Maria, please share something about yourself that maybe people don't know about you, or something that you would just like to share about yourself.
Sure. I guess this is more so because I haven't been at Branksome. I've only came to Branksome in grade 9, but I've been like, I've really always loved reading my whole life. And so I've read a lot about like Kenya and my parents' home country. So like I've always been interested in like government and politics and things relating to that subject matter. So like I felt like it was always something that I wanted to do, like getting involved with the student community, because like I wanted to see how I could use like my strengths to help out, or like, you know, work on areas that I saw like a lot of people had suggestions for. Yeah, so I'd say that's one thing people don't know about me.
And when you think about your student experience, what were some of the aspects that helped you thrive? And Maria, I know that you're in the midst of it, so you can answer that question from that space. But what really helped you thrive?
I think what helps me thrive as a student is definitely like my friends, because the work, especially like when you get to the older grades, it can become very stressful. But just like knowing that there are people who are also working towards the same goals as you, who can like help you out in like an academic sense, but also in like a social sense, like your friends will be able to pull you back and be like, you need to take a break, like this, you're doing too much right now. And so like in that sense, it helps you like de-stress after like a long day, or like if you just have like a week where there's a lot of tests and you're super stressed.
I think at Branksome, maybe just to add on to what Maria talked about too, I had an exceptional group of friends, and they were all just so engaged within the school community. They were all so excited to take part in different events, and I think they really, really motivated me to get more involved, to do my best to really excel within the Branksome environment. So that was really phenomenal. I think I tell this to my parents all the time. I just really looked out on incredible people. And my grade was really incredible too. We always said this. So that really, I think, kind of pushed me as I was going through Branksome. In terms of university, and this is also in regards to Branksome too, but I don't think I realized how much until I kind of left Branksome. But what has definitely made my university experience has been my involvement with the Black Students Network. I think entering McGill, which is a predominantly white institution, as well as Branksome, but especially on such an even larger scale, it takes time to kind of find your place and navigate a new space, especially for Branksome. By grade 12, you know everyone. It was incredible because I would go down the hallways and I'd be like, oh, hey, how are you? And I knew every single teacher, which was phenomenal in its own way. But when you enter university, that changes quite heavily if you go to a larger institution. So having a space like the Black Students Network, where I went to exec meetings, and in my first year, the exec was a phenomenal team of all women. So that was even more empowering. I looked up and I was like, who are these incredible Black women just doing amazing things within the BSN, but also exterior? And I think that really made me feel supported. It made me feel a lot more grounded. And it definitely helped me kind of find my place within a larger university and with many more people. And also work a lot more to kind of find my sense of self in these kind of very transformational years of my life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And CK?
When I was at Branksome, I was one of very few, maybe 4 or 5 Black students there. And Branksome was such a welcoming community at that time. And so I think that informed, and when I say Branksome was a welcoming community, I had some great friends. I was a very top performing student. So I was very competitive, but not competitive against my colleagues, but competitive with myself. I ran track, I was competitive. I was undefeated for all years from grade 9 to 13. I skipped a year until we competed with the public schools. And that for the first time, I lost the first track meet ever, but I did go for almost 4 years undefeated. So I was just very, very competitive, but I found the Branksome community was very welcoming of the fact we were Americans. I'd come from school in Switzerland, so I had some language skills as well. And I was a boarder. So my family lived in Buffalo. So we were as boarding students, you develop a family within a family, because the other girls that are in the dorm become your friends, become your sisters. And I had a great relationship with Allison Roach. Allison Roach was our principal. I love Allison Roach to this day. And it's not that I always agree with all of my teachers, but when you're a great student and you're competitive and you perform well academically and you're well integrated socially, it is a lot easier for you, even if you have differences of color and may have some challenges, because not everybody was open-minded at Branksome. Certainly the faculty was, the administration was, but maybe not all of the students. I mean, we're products of our environment. So for me, some of what it carried me through was just my desire to achieve and to excel. That was really important in my friends. When I got to college, I went to a women's college in the US, Smith College. And by the way, our guidance counselor had gone to Smith College, Ms. McLeod. And so she encouraged me to go. Smith was very interested. And I think much like Torie, the Black student, we call it the BSA, the Black Student Association, was instrumental in me finding my place. I charted my course academically and what I thought I wanted to do professionally, but you do go through, when you go into these different environments, a sense of finding your place. And so in college, it was the BSA. In law school, it was BALSA, the Black Association of Law Students. And then, you go out to the world. I've always been in environments where I'm one of very few African Americans. So, and a lot of times one of few women. So I've always encountered gender issues and race issues. That's just the story of my life. And that's going to be, if it's not already, Torie and Maria, the story of your lives too. But the message for me is, it's not anything that should stop you. It's something that you embrace and you use it to go to higher heights. It is those things that have propelled me into success, because I never let them stop me.
Thank you. And this is very powerful. And I know from listening to each of your stories that it's the relationships and the experiences, it's your inner drive that helps you decide what to do. And even in my own, I know that I'm dedicated to anti-discrimination and anti-racism issues because of my own experiences. And it really does shape you, your life, your education. And so thinking about those experiences around even current events around the Black Lives Matters movement and civil rights movements overall, and women in the women's world and beyond. What are your perceptions of what allyship and leadership looks like today?
I mean, today, we're the loss of Ruth Ginsburg on the US Supreme Court. She was a champion of women's rights. She was a champion of equality. She was a champion of social justice. It's a huge loss for us, particularly in this political environment. I think she just held on as long as she could. And so I think that in answering that question, I like to frame my answer within the context within which we operate. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm in the middle of what I would call a hot mess politically, socially, and we are facing COVID-19. I say that we're living right now in 3 pandemics that are intertwined. COVID-19, which of course is a global and international pandemic. Election suppression, which is a pandemic, I believe, that most afflicts the United States. It's not exclusive to the United States, but that's the current environment within which we're operating. And then police brutality. You all have seen on television people being killed before your very eyes. These are things that impact me significantly every day of my life. I've only worked in the private sector. I've never had the pleasure of working for government, but for 32 years, I mentioned that I worked with Rainbow Push Coalition and Reverend Jesse Jackson, the consummate, iconic civil rights and human rights leader, recognized globally for his extraordinary work in those areas, and voting rights. And that was my way of contributing to the civil rights movement in the US, because again, I worked in the private sector, but I worked on a pro bono basis. Pro bono for you all young folks means free of charge, as Reverend Jackson's counsel, and traveled the world with him on projects, because in our system, when you have leaders that give so much, as a lawyer, I felt, how in the world could I ever charge? You can't, because it's, in my impression, it's God's work that I've done in that space, in my volunteer or pro bono space. So when I think about the Black Lives Matter movement, that is very personal to me, because many of the members, you see these lawyers on TV, these African-American lawyers representing the families of Breonna Taylor, of George Floyd. There's so many unfortunate cases of people being killed at the hands of law enforcement in our country. But when you see those Black lawyers, they're members of my organization. Actually, they're in leadership in our organization. So I speak about them with pride. I've handled cases of police brutality. It's just absolutely devastating to see the number of cases where there's been excessive use of force. And there are hundreds of thousands of cases that go unreported or that you all never hear about. There's an expression that I use and I borrow from Fannie Lou Hamer, who's one of our sheroes here, African-American woman who was a hero in this country. And she said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's the sentiment of many of us in this country, many of my colleagues, many of my peers. You know, you fight the good fight, but when every day you face pandemics, racism, in my impression, is a pandemic because it can be crippling. And so when I look at racial equality today, gender equality, I am very optimistic because I see young people who are protesting in the streets, who are, and we represent a rainbow coalition, if you will, of people who are protesting, different ages. And I look at Ruth Ginsburg, who held on because she wanted to live to be able to give young girls like Torie and Maria and me. See, I consider myself young, but the reality is we know there's like a 40 age difference. But anyway, to give us hope that there will be a better tomorrow for us. I felt that at Branksome, the teachers, the house mothers, you know, when you're a boarder, the house mothers are that surrogate mother for you. And for us, Miss Roach, the principal, she was like a surrogate mother too. And even when there were racial issues, racial problems, you know, there are two ways you can address it. You can put your head in the sand and act like it didn't happen, or you can address it head on. And when I was at Branksome, we addressed it head on. And I don't know if it's that way now, but we pushed our way through racial strife. I recall walking through Rosedale. I believe it's Rosedale. That's a community where Branksome is. You know, I forgot terminology. But Rosedale, like we would go as boarders on the weekend. The favorite thing we like to do was walk to the bay. You know, we go to the bay or we go to Eaton Center. This was big stuff back then. You all probably don't even do that now. And I recall the sort of supercilious looks or the odd looks that we would receive from the community in Rosedale. And again, two of my best buds were one was Liberian African and the other one was from the Bahamas. And you know, it's a look, quite frankly, I always encountered that look, so it was nothing new, but certainly there was a look or feeling of you all are out of place. Well, that wasn't going to stop anyone, but certainly it makes you feel like the other. That's what discrimination does. That's what inequity does. It makes you feel like the other, like you're not a part of mainstream. And when you feel, and not that you're trying to be part of mainstream, but no one should make you feel like you're the other, because the other implies you're less than, you're not as good as, you're worse than. And that's the part that's wrong. And so when people kind of looked at like a funny way, like maybe we were going to rob them or something, I mean, I don't know, but it was just that feeling like sometimes we're going to stores, and this happens all the time in the US. So Canada is a much more open, globally open melting pot than the US. In the US, this happens today. So what I'm saying happened in the 70s in Rosedale, on occasion, not all the time, and in other parts of Toronto, happens on a regular basis here in the United States 40 years later. So I want to make that point.
There is an element of hope as well. I want to go back to a couple of things that you picked up. One is that it feels different than it ever has before by who is standing together side by side voicing these concerns. That there is that context piece from where you're at within Canadian society, within US society that is playing out, but there are also some shared experiences around discrimination and oppression that are perennial, that are just timeless in terms of how they are continually showing up in the experiences of our Black community, but also our larger BIPOC community as well. And Torie and Maria, you're working in the Canadian side of this work. So, and the question is centered around what leadership and allyship is looking like in our current context.
I think that when it comes to allyship and it comes to next steps, a common Canadian trait is to compare ourselves to the US context. And I think that in doing so, we often look over or deem ourselves as much better, which doesn't allow us to look at the structural, the systemic issues of anti-Black racism within our country. I just got off a call previously to this, actually, that was a Black Opportunity Fund call, which was started by some incredible Black leaders across the country. And it was a healthcare town hall that went into talking about the problems within our healthcare system, and the fact that our healthcare system was not created for Black people. If anything, it is created to exclude Black people and other people of color from receiving the services necessary. Working at McGill and working for the BSN, we actually just released a media campaign that dove into the issues within academic institutions that have discriminated against Black people for years. I know even my own grandfather went to McGill. At that time, Black individuals weren't able to do their residency at McGill because it was just simply a law that Black students were banned. Queens, there was a ban on Black students entering the medical school until 2018. That was only just recently moved. We know that recently there have been multiple people killed by the police across Canada. We saw the story of Reggie's in Toronto. There are many more in Montreal. Many people forget that there was slavery in Canada, and that even when a lot of US slaves escaped and went to Halifax, they ended up being reslaved. I could go on for a very long time, but there are so many examples. And I think that as Black students, we are exceptionally tired of many people telling us that the issues within Canada are not there, but they're there, they're present, and they are affecting the lives of Black Canadians. So in talking about allyship, and in talking about next steps, and in talking about how non-Black people can make sure that they are supporting and being real fighters for change, I think that the first step is always learning. You need to learn and you need to reflect. One thing to maybe a good place to start in terms of that is privileges. Everyone has privilege in many different ways. I know that I myself have many different types of privileges, but a very key privilege for a lot of people and a lot of people within the Branksome community is white privilege. And how, in terms of having white privilege, does that not allow you or how, in terms of having white privilege, do you then contribute to certain problems without knowing it? Do you contribute to the pain of Black people without knowing it? And how then do you learn and then you deconstruct the ways that you've been hurting Black people? The first step, unlearning things that are toxic, and then also learning in terms of ways of how you can support. And one of those ways is learning about Canadian history. One thing that Branksome can do, teaching Black Canadian history, huge, so incredibly important. The second thing, because I know I'm going on a bit, so I'll keep this on more the brief side, is that when it comes to fighting, when it comes to pushing for change, the people that you see at the forefront of this is always Black people, because it affects them personally. But a key thing that I think CK mentioned was so many Black people are sick and tired of being sick and tired, and they're also exhausted. I myself am exhausted. A lot of times, many individuals think, oh, it's fine, they're leading the charges, or we'll create diversity and inclusion committees. Which are good starts, but then the main people on the diversity and inclusion committees are all Black people, which again is good because we need to be there, and it's important for us to have a voice, but then also at the same time, it's us, again, usually leading this work. So I think that I say this because there needs to be a balance in terms of white people and non-Black people in general stepping up and making sure that they are also acting beyond the learning, acting and helping in terms of really making change, so that it's not always just Black people having to do a lot of the work.
It is heart's work, it is hard work, and the question I'm wondering as I hear is how you sustain yourself in this work. And now, Maria, we had a conversation around allyship yesterday at Diversity Council, so I'm going to turn it over to you as well, just so you can answer the question too.
Sure. So I feel like leadership and allyship definitely have to be interconnected, because I believe we are at a point where you can't have good leadership, or you can't have progressive leadership unless, like, to quote the great Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, you recognize the intersectionalities with the people you are working with and you adapt to that. Because as we all know, if we want to receive true equity, one, we have to recognize that everybody is coming and starting from a different place, whether that be because of racial gaps, gender gaps, ability gaps. There are so many intersectionalities that have to be considered when we actually want to reach true equity. And there is kind of a balancing act to this, because it's not creating quotas and saying, oh, we have to have this many Black people here, we have to have this many women here to reach like equity, but it's about giving people who are interested, who are from marginalized groups, the abilities and the access to information and access to information and tools that they need to reach those goals and reach those areas where they have been historically kept out of. So similar to what Torie and CK have already said, I do think there is this, or not I think, there definitely is this personal level to the Black Lives Matter movement for Black people, because what for non-Black people, it might just be another name or another like story, another body that's just being seen. But to see yourself constantly being violated, assaulted, killed on camera, that really does take a toll on your mental health. And it really gets hard to continue this kind of work and continue, constantly advocating for yourself, having to feel like you have to prove your humanity to people who are really sometimes not willing to listen. In our communities, we need to stop comparing ourselves to America, because in comparing ourselves to America, we're not doing our best to become the progressive nation Canada claims to be, and we're continuing to do what has historically done and sweeping under the rug Canada's continued injustices to the Black community and other communities of color. There is work that you can do on different levels to dismantle racism within your own thinking and dismantle the biases or reduce the biases you have, and also work that you can do with people in your circle who might not be exposed to Black people as much, or people of color, or just working and recognizing your privilege, as has been said many times before, and then evolving that as you grow with yourself, as you grow with the information you know, as you grow with the power of influence you have. I think using that and continuing to be an ally in the circles that you are in. Branksome is definitely, for the most part, a very progressive community, and I think that a lot of people I don't see it as willful ignorance. I feel like it as kind of the bubble that Branksome is in, because we are a very secluded part of Toronto. I mean, as Torie mentioned, there's the majority of the population does tend to be white. There is the wealth aspect of being able to attend the school. So it's not even willful ignorance. It's just it is you're a product of your environment. But I feel like as we do have so much more access to information, especially in the age of the internet, I do feel like when people are willing to learn and people are willing to step back and say, this is how I've been blessed or privileged in life, and this is how I can use my privilege or my skills to help other people, I think that's when we really make progress as a society, both on a small level, whether that be changes within Branksome and our small school community, or eventually carrying that over and making bigger changes in our maybe Toronto, Ontario, or even Canadian community.
I do want to go back to that question that's been lingering in my mind, knowing, the tremendous work that each of you are doing. How do you sustain yourself as leaders?
For me, it's spirituality. I am a Christian, and I do believe in God, because sometimes things happen that are just the unthinkable and unspeakable. So as a leader, I try to be grounded in reality, never get I never try to get too comfortable with a great situation because you have to make a little bit of trouble. It's good trouble, as the late Congressman John Lewis in the United States said. And I think leadership is about being a mentor and being a role model for so many. So for me, there's a combination of spirituality, my family. My family keeps me grounded. When you have, frankly, two teenage boys, you become very grounded. But, you know, that's just the reality of it. And so at my age, but then the other thing too, striving for excellence. As a leader, I always want to learn, like listening to Torie and Maria. I love listening to them because, you know, you learn something. And I just kind of feel like that used to be me. My goodness. They're just young and fresh and filled with and not that I'm not filled with that, but I'm also filled with 40 years of other stuff. So it's wonderful to hear you all, because you all give me that comfort that our future is bright. So as a leader, you have to be able to look ahead. You have to know that there's going to be a brighter tomorrow. You have to know that you stand on the shoulders of people who paved the way so that you could get to a better place. I recognize I was the first Black head girl at Branksome Hall. When I was head girl, I wasn't thinking of it as me being the first Black head girl at Branksome Hall. I was just thinking I'm head girl at Branksome Hall, recognizing, however, that there had never been anyone to step in my shoes. I wasn't the first Black prefect, but that for me was leadership, recognizing that behind me, I felt sometimes, some way, somewhere, there would be another young Black girl who would be head girl. And I knew that I had to be mindful of that and set a great example, make sure that everybody in the Branksome community for years to come would know this is how color of the skin is not the issue. But I was mindful of the fact that there might be other Black girls that came behind me, and I wanted them to know that they could do it. They would do it. They would succeed, and it could be a great journey as well that could help them down the line in the future.
Thank you. Maria, how do you sustain yourself as a leader?
I feel as though when I feel overwhelmed, or when I feel like there's a lot going on, especially in like the context of what's happened in the last few months when attention was brought to Black Lives Matter, it really felt like with the kind of community that Branksome is, everybody or a lot of people in my grade were coming to me asking me questions. What's this? How can I help? Things like that. And I really had to like step back and be able to talk to my family and just like take time to be with myself and my family and be able to, you know, kind of be at peace with that and realize that there are these issues going on in the world, and there are these like continuing issues that are happening, but it's okay to take time for yourself and take time for your family and just be in the moment. And that kind of goes hand in hand with setting boundaries. So sometimes it's like logging off of Instagram for a couple of days in the heat of the movement, or, you know, just taking a walk, saying that like you won't be able to get back to people right away, because I feel like again this movement is very personal and very like it can be a lot of stress to deal with. And so I think that that's definitely those are two things that I use.
Thank you. Torie, is there anything you want to add in terms of sustaining yourself as a leader?
Over the past couple of years, I really had to learn how to say no. I think there was also a part of me who is very people pleasing. I think even as I've learned more about myself, part of this maybe comes from knowing and always being one of the few Black people in spaces, feeling like I needed to say yes to everything, feeling like when people ask questions related to Black related issues that I had to answer, even though those type of things are extremely tiring sometimes. And also it's not my job to have to answer everybody's questions all the time, and realizing that that is a true fact. Like, I don't think I always realized that, or just, being able to kind of say, no, I don't have the energy at this moment. That has been life-changing. Something so simple has been so life-changing in terms of just kind of making sure that I take time for myself, that I rejuvenate, and that I'm able to kind of do, I guess, the rest of tasks beyond just activism well as well.
What are the qualities of a leader? If you had to think of 2 or 3 qualities, what would you say are the topmost qualities that a leader needs to have in your mind?
One trait that I think has been so important, especially when I was president of the BSN, was finding a way to not speak for others per se, but uplift the community so that they have a voice to speak as well. I think that a lot of times, especially maybe in the positions that I've held, because I am one of the few Black people in the room, many people look to me to speak for everyone within the Black community, even though the Black community is so diverse within perspectives, where they come from, among so many other factors. And so when I'm in those positions, using that platform to be able to bring other people to the table, I think is just so crucial in terms of a great leader, because no one person has the perfect answer. If anything, we're stronger when we have more voices at the table, more people who are there, who are able to share their opinions, share their life experiences that can then inform better decision making moving forward.
I think the three things: one, the ability to listen. If you're a leader, you have to be able to listen.
Mm.
The second, the ability to make it not always about you. And the third, being mindful that you're always a role model if you're a leader. Whether you want to be, whether you feel like being, or whether you are tired of being, you're really always a role model. That's part of leadership. So those would be the three qualities. And just, everything's a juggling act. Both Torie and Maria talked about setting boundaries. I'm still juggling that today. And I've got y'all by 4 decades. Still, I'm still juggling, setting the boundaries, saying no.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm president of the National Bar Association. So saying no, I have teenage kids. I run a law firm, president of the Bar Association, all these things that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Continue to do that. But just remember that you're always a leader, and sometimes you're called on to a greater service, and you have to step up to the plate and take the mantle. That's what it is to be a leader. You don't have to always do it, but when called to serve, at some point you decide to serve.
And I know that in each of your own ways, you've also talked about, people to look to or people who stand alongside. So I'm wondering, and CK, you mentioned mentors. Who are your mentors as leader? Who do you look up to as leaders?
My mom, my mother. My mother is, she's a woman of a certain age now, but she was a very strong businesswoman and a very dynamic mother. I had gone to boarding school really most of my educational career, from grade 1 to grade 13. And having a dynamic mother who meant what she said and said what she meant, and a strong disciplinarian, but yet a very strong business person. She's a strong role model and was always balancing. So I grew up with someone who really didn't, think that we should make excuses for things like that. And so that was instilled in me. And then there were other people along the way who were role models for me, people who no one would even think of. I could think of a woman who was not well educated, but when I would come home, she had been a babysitter when I was younger. And, as we grew, because I went away to school, and as we grew into our internationalness, let's just say that, learning different languages and all this kind of stuff and traveling the world, she probably went to 3rd or 4th grade. And so when we would come home, sometimes I might use like a big word here or there. And I remember her saying to me, don't go using those big words on me. Like, you're not really impressing me. I love you, but just remember to stay humble. And then there, of course, were other people like Reverend Jesse Jackson. My goodness, he's a civil rights icon in the world. Of course, he's going to inspire me, because for 32 years, what turned out to be one assignment where we traveled to Gabon. At the time, this was 1988. Reverend Jackson had run for president in 1984 and 1988. And you all, Torie and Maria, you all weren't even born, but he ran for president. There would not have been a Barack Obama or even a Kamala Harris as vice presidential candidate, but for what Reverend Jesse Jackson did in the 80s, because we all stand on people's shoulders. And so I met him in 1988 when the president of Gabon, the Gabonese Republic, wanted to meet him. And I had traveled extensively and done a lot of work in Africa at that point in my career. And I was, and it was, I'm a French speaker. And so it was a case that was assigned to me, and he was there. He was going to negotiate a labor dispute in London. So we went from, with his team, and I was a lawyer on the case, and I was a young lawyer. We went from Washington, we stopped off in London, he negotiated the labor dispute. I was like sitting like this, oh my God, labor dispute, I mean, I was in such awe because he was really an international figure. And from 1988 to the present, I have represented him, worked on so many different matters over the years, traveled with him internationally, worked on whether it's domestic and been really his lawyer. And there are other people who have done legal work for him, please don't misunderstand me, but he has been a living icon and someone who has defined my civil rights agenda, because he is that icon. He marched with Reverend Jackson. In the United States, he's well known, but also internationally, he's well known. So if I had to think of a male who really influenced my civil rights agenda and how I felt the need to give back as a social justice engineer, Reverend Jesse Jackson. Women, my mom, Miss Roach from Branksome Hall, she was an inspiration when I was at Branksome Hall. You at different stages in your life, you have mentors. You have people who have a positive influence on you. And then when you grow up and you go into a different place, they're different people, because that's part of growth. And you have to be open to and be receptive as you go into different rooms and rise in your career or do whatever your career, to different types of leaders influencing you.
My mentors, for the most part, it's probably been my parents. So for my dad, he's always encouraged me to go and try new things and really kind of push me towards the sciences and push me towards challenging myself and learning how to problem solve, be organized. So I really appreciated that, because I was a really shy kid, and I kind of wanted to just stay with where I was and kind of not push any buttons, or I had that mentality oh, well, certain things aren't for girls, or certain things I wouldn't do well in them. And he's like, okay, just try. And then I'm like, okay. And I tried it. And then I've ever since grade 4, I just got so interested in coding and robotics and everything to do with tech. And it's so that push, that mentality, just try it. Doesn't matter if you're not good at it. It doesn't matter if you don't think you're supposed to be here, just try it. And then you open those doors for yourself. So I think that's been a really huge influence in my life, and has pushed me to continue even applying for positions like this. I was oh, I don't know if I should do it. And he's like, okay, just try it. And if you don't know, then you're never gonna know. And then I think for my mom, she's been such a strong influence in my life. She has always kept everything so organized. I do not know how she balances everything, but I aspire to be her. She successful career, successful family, successful just active life. She always knows the right thing to say, and she always knows the kind of the right support to give, and the right kind of advice that I need whenever I'm feeling unsure about something or anything. She's the kind of person who I'll go to, and she's the kind of person who will just listen to what I have to say, and also give me that advice, and remind me to take care of myself as well, that I don't have to be constantly always giving to other people, but also to take time for myself. And I think that's something I've really learned from her, with the way she's balanced her work life and then also her personal life, and setting those boundaries.
Beyond family, I can accredit Branksome teachers. I've had phenomenal teachers who I just still love with my whole heart, who showed me that I, again, could do anything I put my mind to. So I'm really thankful for that. And then going back to family, I guess, again, my parents were really good at showing me how to seek out help from others. And I think that has really helped me to this day, of when I want to try something. If I know someone in that field, if I know of someone that could connect me with someone else, I've definitely, because of them, gotten the skill to be able to reach out and seek mentorship in a bunch of different areas. So I think now I am really fortunate to just have people in so many different areas, especially as I enter the real world, which is a real fact now. I need to get a job. But I've been really blessed with just a lot of support in many different areas. So yeah, just family, teachers, and a bunch of other people, I guess, in many different aspects of my life.
So the question I'm just going to read is what would you say is the role of installation and the importance of traditions like?
As head girl, I remember what my installation was like, and just that moment in time where I thought, this is really, back in the day, I would say this is cool, but this is really a wonderful part of the tradition of this school. And I remembered looking out at all of the students, at my friends, because I was at Branksome for 4 years, at the house mothers, at Miss Roach, at the teachers who had embraced me so much. And I remember thinking, I feel blessed to be part of this tradition. I didn't feel that I felt blessed to be part of a tradition, even though I was American or I was African American. I just felt blessed to be part of that tradition. And so I think the installation process, when you're installing, it's like when you're installing officers where you're swearing. And I'm licensed in 5 different jurisdictions, and I've given and many other different courts. And so, it's part of a tradition. It's a rite of passage, if you will. And so when I think of the installation prefix, I think it's one of those sacred times, a sacred ceremony in the Branksome tradition that I hope that you always hold on to, because it's one of those things that reminds us of the Scottish heritage of Branksome Hall. That's one of those things. We can deviate and blend in a whole bunch of other things, but I do think that there's something sacred about certain traditions, and that is one of them that I look at fondly and I hope will continue forever and ever at Branksome.
Torie?
A key aspect was the speakers, and just highlighting all the incredible leaders. I know that when I was in grade 7 and 8, I was like, wow, these people are so old, and it was just so exciting. So I think, to me, installation is mainly about highlighting incredible leaders. I always learned some really important and sometimes humbling, sometimes just really informative messages from the speakers who were there. And so, yeah, I think, to me, installation is just a great place to learn, to celebrate, and to learn and to celebrate. I'll leave it at that.
Maria?
Yeah, I kind of want to touch on 2 points. Firstly, like installation kind of serves as a sense of like inspiration and motivation for me. But I think also kind of speaking to Torie's point about like informative speakers, I remember my first installation that I went to in grade 9, there was a speaker that had come to speak about, I believe, her experience with imposter syndrome. And that like really resonated with me, because that's something that I had experienced, like have continued to experience over my time at Branksome, but also just navigating other spaces where I tend to be the only Black person, or maybe the only Black woman there. And so I felt like it was really like satisfying to realize that like this was something that I had been feeling. It wasn't just me being like crazy or me like reading into things too much. Like there were other people who were experiencing this, and like they're like, now that I knew that this was like a thing and it had a name to it, it was a term, I could go ask other people about it, and I could look at ways to like to mitigate this feeling that I've had, and like find ways to like kind of take care of myself even when I am experiencing this feeling. So just like those kinds of like speaker experiences, like those are things that like I'll remember forever, and like that'll carry over with me, and maybe even be able to help other people with, other girls who might be struggling with this, other Black girls that come to Branksome who might potentially struggle with this.
Thank you. And as we're thinking about installation and leaders, what is your advice for young leaders? As women and as part of the BIPOC community, what is your advice for the leaders in our community?
I could start with this one.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say my advice, speaking as one young leader to another, is just do it. Like, you literally don't know what the outcome is going to be. If you're applying for a position and you're like, oh, I'm not sure, I don't know what other people are applying for the position, they might be more qualified, just send in the application, write it, send in the application. If it makes you feel better, close the tab after and just forget about it. But there's literally the worst thing that can possibly happen is that they say no. And if you're really curious as to why you didn't end up getting the position or why you didn't make that specific team, ask and look for feedback and use that to improve for your future and use that for like other positions you might apply for. But then even if you're too nervous and you're feeling down about it, just think about the next opportunity that could come along, because I feel like especially in our young lives, we have so much ahead of us and so much potential that is stored in our futures. And like I think one of my teachers used like a metaphor of like a slingshot, that we're like this is only the beginning and like we're starting to be pulled back, and then once we graduate Branksome, we're gonna like fly away, like whether that's university, whatever we choose to do in our post-secondary. So it's not the end of the world to not get one opportunity. Just use that as like a learning point and use that as like a place of reference and something that you can remember that feeling, how it felt to maybe not get that position. And then when you do get the position, or if you do get the position that you really want, remember that feeling and remember how good it felt to work hard and be recognized for that position. And I think also to seek out mentorship and leadership from other people in the community. I know personally for me, like in grade 9, joining Branksome, one place I really found the community was what's now called the Black Student Union. I used to be called Afroview, but now it's called the Black Student Union. There's only one other Black girl in my grade, I believe. So finding that like space in the Black Student Union where I could like talk with other girls who like could empathize with what I was facing and could also give me advice to what I might be facing in the school, or like just in general, just like even just a place to have conversation. It was really like important that I found those spaces where I felt like I could be like my authentic self and I could really like talk about what was going on. So I'd say like finding those mentors and finding those like friends and in spaces, so you also take care of yourself as well.
I would give a reminder that you yourself are still learning, because we are all still learning. And within this role or within your leadership role, always make sure to remember this idea and not act like you have all the answers. Because at the end of the day, I don't think any of us have all of the answers ourselves. I think that community and drawing on the insights and the experiences of other people is extremely crucial. So one, just remember, then within that, remember to keep learning, remember to keep informing yourself, because knowledge provides so much power in that regard. What's another piece of advice? In terms of other advice, believe in yourself. I think Maria said this really well, but you, again, even while you're still learning and drawing on other people's experiences and working within community, you still need to believe in yourself. You have so much power. You have to do great things, and you are an exceptional human being. And I think it's important to never forget that. And to hold that power and that light within you as you go and move forward and you help make change within your community or within society or within the world in general. So those are my 2 pieces of advice.
Thank you. And CK.
I think I'll answer the question by reflecting on 3 Branksome Hall vignettes. And I'll start by saying, embrace the Branksome family. You never know when you'll meet them again. And again, because I'm from the United States, I don't operate in the Canadian space as much, but embrace the family, because you never know where you will encounter another Branksomite or a Branksomite's family. In 1988, I was a relatively new lawyer. I graduated in 87, and I got placed in an assignment that would cause me to travel to Antigua and Barbuda. And the client, I thought it was very interesting that as a baby lawyer, none of the other lawyers, and I was a firm that had 175 lawyers in that office, I found it very interesting that none of the other lawyers wanted that assignment, because I thought, wow, I'm going to travel. It was settling claims it was a litigation case, and I was a new lawyer. Said, wow, we're going to travel to Antigua and Barbuda because that's where the client is. Who wouldn't want to do that? Well, I soon learned why. So I spoke to the client initially, and there was no internet. We communicated by fax and telex. You all don't even know what telex is, but there was no internet. No, Myra, you know what I'm talking about. So there was not this, you just type boom, or as someone's talking, you're doing research on them, none of that. So I pick up the phone and I call the client, and our client was an American who had a hunting and fishing lodge in Barbuda, which is a companion island to Antigua. And we had gotten into some dispute with a fellow Antiguan who sued him. So they were going back and forth, and the Antiguan government was getting involved. And so our firm, which was a political type of a firm, got involved, and I was assigned the case. So I was really excited because we're going to settle his claims and all this. And so I called the client and I introduced myself. Hello, my name is CK PURKS. He said, what? And I said, I'm CK PURKS. I'm the new lawyer assigned to your case. He said, oh, no. I have got to talk to the partners. I do not believe in women attorneys. I mean, I can't believe, they've assigned you to my case. Now, I'm a baby lawyer. I'm like 20, let me see, you graduated lawyer, 24, really excited, all this kind of thing. I'm really excited. I do not believe in women attorneys. I bet, I'm going to hang up right now. I'm going to talk to the senior partners because this is ridiculous. I was a trial lawyer and I had my own firm, and we never had women. This is in the 80s. We never had women. And I mean, this is an insult. This is awful. And I thought to myself, wait till you see me. Because he didn't know I was Black. I said, what? But he said so he hung up the phone, and I instantly understood why not a single solitary other person wanted to work on that case. But when you're a new lawyer, there's an expression, something goes downhill. Goes downhill. You're at the bottom. You take the cases you can get, and the crazy clients too. So he talked to the senior partners. He wanted to get me off the case because he said that women inferior. He actually said this. I don't believe in women lawyers. Women are inferior. I think women shouldn't be trial lawyers. I mean, just stuff that's just the unthinkable. And so he talked to the senior partners. They're like, that's it. CK's on the case. And frankly, at that point, nobody else was going to do it. And so I ended up taking the case, and I worked with this very difficult client for 3 months. He hadn't seen me. 3 months back and forth, sending faxes. I would come into the office, and I was oftentimes the first one in the office, and I would have like 20 pages of preliminary thoughts faxed to me. And he was doing all these tests. So after 3 months, I went down to Antigua and Barbuda because we were going to have a settlement conference to settle his claims. And I discover when I get down there, he has, his jet that pulled into Antigua and that took me to Barbuda. And I was the only one on the plane. And I am, who I am. And he had, at the time, just think of 88, Nelson Mandela, apartheid. Okay, this is what we're talking about. He has a South African pilot. And so when the South African pilot sees me, because there's no internet, you can't look and see who, he's like, oh, you're CK PURKS? That's a maiden name. And I was like, yes. He was like, okay, takes me in the plane. 15 minutes later, we land. And they have all this fanfare, right? Where he's got the red carpet. When you have private jets, they always roll this carpet. And he's got some people that work for him, all Antiguans. And he was really someone who people despise because he had been a racist, not very nice person. And so when I get off the plane, literally, I'm the only person on the plane other than the pilot. He looks around me because he's like, yeah, I don't know who you are, but he looks around because he's looking for his lawyer. Because after 3 months, he finally embraces the concept that there's a woman who's representing him, despite all of the difficulty. And he admits that for a woman, I grasped his issue. And at some point I said, can we just stop with the for the woman thing? I mean, I'm your lawyer. He was like, well, yeah, well. So anyway, he refuses. He's looking for his lawyer to come off the plane. So I go up to him and I say, I'm CK PURKS. He said, what? I said, yeah, he said, no, it's impossible. Absolutely impossible. Because he had my resume. Absolutely impossible. And he proceeds there in the rudest way to cross-examine me. I'm 24. And I remember back to the first call when he said he didn't believe in women lawyers. And I said to myself, wait till you see me. And sure enough, when he saw me, he was horrified. But the best moment of all of that was the people working with him who were laughing. Oh, oh, look at his lawyer. They were laughing hysterically because they knew that he was such a racist and that it would eat at him because they had no idea that I was Black, but that it would eat him alive to see that this woman, this lawyer, was actually Black. So when I say that, I'm raising this because my opposing counsel was Lord Kelsick, and his daughters were Margot and Sophie Kelsick, who had gone to Branksome Hall. So not only am I a baby lawyer with a crazy client in a foreign country with a crazy client, but my opposing counsel, and I was waiting for the partners to come in from the US to help me, was the father, an esteemed jurist out of St. Kitts by the name of Lord Kelsick, and I had gone to Branksome Hall with his daughters. And I remember him at their graduation because he was so stunning and good looking. We couldn't help but so he's my opposing counsel. I said, oh, this is going from bad to worse. I'm 24 and this magnificent Branksomeite's father is my opposing counsel. So you never know in Branksome when you encounter people in the world. So that was my first lesson. Always be your best. We settled the claims. And when I reminded him, I said, like a sheepish way, I was fighting because, when you're on the other side, you're settling the claims. But sheepishly, I said, I went to Branksome and that was only like maybe 10 years before with Sophie and Margaret. He said, oh my goodness. And he was so distinguished and wonderful. And he probably gave me a pass because of that. But that's a Branksome connection. The second one in 1989, when I was at Branksome, one of my best friends I said was from Liberia. Her name was Bindu Dennis. And you all may have heard this because this was something that marked the Branksome Hall family. Her father was the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Liberia, an esteemed jurist. He had gone to Lincoln in the United States, and I believe he went to Georgetown Law School. And when we were in my senior year, he was assassinated. There was a coup d'etat, and he was assassinated. And CBS aired it on television. And Bindu's sister, Soni, had gone to Branksome Hall. And Bindu, we came back from lunch from class, and everyone in the dorm, I don't know if it's like this now, was crying. People were crying because Bindu's sister was waiting for her. She was at University of Toronto, and she came there, and people were really, really upset. And I was walking with Bindu, and that's when she discovered, just like that her father had been assassinated. A Branksome, just like that, on television for the world to see. I mean, I don't know if you all can imagine that. That was a dark time in our history at Branksome, not because of anything Branksome did, but because a person that we loved, a Branksome student's father, was assassinated on international television. So fast forward about, that was in 1979, I think thereabouts, a decade I'm working at this big firm, the same firm where I went to Antigua. And Bindu calls me and says, look, they're recognizing my dad, posthumously at Georgetown Law, which is where I'd gone to law school. And she said, can you go to the ceremony? I said, absolutely, because I was in DC in practice. And so I go to the ceremony, and who do I see? My senior partner at the firm that I'm working at. And I said, oh my gosh, what are you doing here? He said, well, what are you doing here? I said, well, Bindu, his youngest daughter, is one of my best friends. We went to school in Canada together. He was like, oh my goodness, Cecil Dennis was our client. We used to represent the government of Liberia. We lobbied on their behalf. So again, the Branksome Hall connection. At that moment, I cried because I remembered it took me back to her father's assassination. And so what I say about that, so at the ceremony at Georgetown, my alma mater, we celebrated the life of a great man whose daughter was my best friend from Branksome. And then finally, the third vignette, and then I'm going to get to the answer of your question, is last year, I did a trial master seminar. Because I'm a trial lawyer, we teach different aspects of trial. And one of the students, it was at, I think it was Thurgood Marshall School of Law. I was at school in Texas, in Houston, Texas. I can't remember the name of the school, but we did 2 days of trial masters teaching the law students various aspects of trial. And I did a presentation, and one of the students had asked me a question. His last name was Kemp. Remember I talked about Margaret Kemp from the Bahamas? And he had a Bahamian, slight little Bahamian sort of accent. And I said, wait a minute. Are you from the Bahamas? He said, yes. I said, are you by any chance related to Margaret Kemp? He said, that's my aunt. That was my aunt. So the Margaret Kemp, the late Margaret Kemp, there were three of us who hung together so tight. Bindu Dennis from Liberia, Margaret Kim from the Bahamas, and me. Her nephew was in that class in Houston, Texas, and I was teaching him. And so, of course, I had to divert the conversation and talk about Branksome Hall and just how important, because she had passed away at that point. So the moral to the story is you take Branksome wherever you are. You will run into Branksomites wherever you are, their family, and you have to, that expression, do you all still say the expression, keep well the road? Mm-hmm. You have to remember that you're always representing a great institution that for girls, the message is the sky is the limit. The sky is the limit. Even when you confront adversity at Branksome, the sky is the limit because those teachers are pushing you to excellence, are propelling you to excellence, are propelling you along with your family to understand that no doors should be closed to you because you're Branksomites. And when you run into other people in your life, I've given the course of 35 years as a lawyer, what's happened to me, and it all comes back to people that I knew from Branksome. So you always carry that badge, and remember, just as you carry with pride your family's name, and you don't want to disappoint your parents, at least I'm that way. At this age, I'm still thinking, oh my God, my mom, she's going to be so embarrassed. At this age, remember that you're always carrying Branksome because Branksome is a formidable institution. So one, my answer is embrace your Branksome family, carry Branksome, and remember as young women, you're going to fall. You're going to have devastating, awful, terrible, disgraceful, despicable things that happen to you. Maybe because of your gender, maybe because of your race, if that's the issue, or maybe just because in life. But what Branksome has taught you, and you may not realize it, is how to get up, wipe your knees off, and keep it going. Look forward, don't look back, look forward, and don't let things stand in your way. For a client to tell me he didn't believe in women lawyers and to see me and to completely disrespect and ignore me, I was like, you know what, he's crazy. But the reality is, I'm the one who's going to resolve his case. And eventually it clicked because there was no way around it. And I did resolve his case. And the person on the other side was this majestic father of a Branksomite. And I am certain he gave me a pass, meaning he could have been really vicious as we're, in trial work sometimes is that way. He was gentle, he was courteous. I learned things from him. And I felt certain that part of it was because I was from Branksome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That was so powerful just to hear, CK, your stories and how they connected through your life, and as well as just your advice from both you and Maria. I want to give you the chance to do two things. I'd like you to ask each other a question, or is there, after listening and spending so much time together, is there a question that you have for each other that you're curious about?
I have questions for both Maria and for Torie. So starting with you, Maria, you mentioned that your parents are from Kenya?
Yeah.
Okay, and so how did you find, at Branksome, when I was at Branksome, there were my girlfriend Bindu, and then we had there were two students, Bindu and her cousin from Liberia, and then we had another student from, I think she was from Ghana. I think she was from Ghana when I was there. And then my sister and I were African-Americans from the United States, and Margaret and her sister had graduated from the Bahamas. And that was basically the totality of and there may have been one other person that came that was the totality of the Black community. But did you feel, or do you feel while you're at Branksome, any particular difference with being originally, or your parents being originally from a country in Africa versus just, any other Black student that might be there? I'm just curious.
I don't think so. I feel like it's always been more on the basis of like race, like small like microaggressions or, just like certain questions. But I've never felt that it was on that basis. I feel like, yeah, it was definitely more of like a racial thing. I feel like the diaspora is more something something that like more like Black people would recognize amongst each other more than outside non-Black groups would recognize.
Our most recent generation of Black students at Branksome have mainly been very second generation. So my mom is Jamaican. My dad grew up here, but his parents are from Trinidad and Grenada. But the majority of my Black friends during my time at Branksome were all born in Toronto. Not all, but a good majority of us were born in Toronto. So I think that when it came to our backgrounds, because there were so few of us within the Branksome space, we didn't necessarily focus as much on our backgrounds as much as our Blackness itself. Kind of looking at those little specifications in terms of, oh, you're Jamaican, oh, you're Nigerian, oh, you're Ghanaian, didn't really come up because we were still so focused on that aspect of uniting us around our Blackness in general. And that was still such a new concept. So now I think we probably speak about it more as we reflect on our experiences. And I know Lexi and Sophia, who were two other leaders during my time at Branksome, talk about a lot how our Blackness and our notion of Blackness has kind of expanded as we've gotten older and we've had more time to reflect on the many different nuances that kind of make up our sense of self. But during our time at Branksome, it was definitely more focused on just being Black. Especially because most of the microaggressions we faced and the way that people perceived us was that we were Black, not that we were Jamaican, excuse me, or that we were Nigerian, but truly Black. So, yeah.
Thank you, Maria. And Torie, do you have questions for CK or for each other?
CK, I have a question. I just kind of want to know more about what it was like working with Jesse Jackson, because that seems really cool. Like, I don't know, was there any any particular story or like moment you have that was really inspirational with them?
In his heyday, he's slowed down. He's almost 80 now, and it's widely known that he does have Parkinson's, and so he's slowed down just a little bit, but not a lot. He's still traveling whenever there's a social justice need, like in Kenosha. With the shooting in Kenosha. He was in Kenosha. So, but I remember in 1988 when we went to Libreville to Gabon with, as I said, the president, he was a guest of the president, and the firm that I was at represented the government of Gabon. So that's why it became one of my clients. And I remembered that when we landed in Libreville, they had all of these translators. They had translators. I've done translation work, and so you usually translate into your native tongue. Right. And so I remember they had we were going to be there a week, and they had a translator for him that was going to stay with him continuously. But of course, they had never translated for Reverend Jesse Jackson. And they were Gabonese, and they were extremely skilled translators. But when you're translating, you have to really understand the person that you're translating for. Because if you're translating, hello, my name is Reverend Jesse Jackson, that's an easy translation. That's at the UN. But if you talk about the belly of the whale and you're doing analogies and because that's when the term African American came into play. And so Reverend Jackson, for the first time on the continent, Reverend Jackson is the one who introduced the notion of African American. It was something that we were talking about in the United States, but he brought it to the continent. So in Gabon, that was the first time. So that was one of his messages, how our connection to the continent, we're no longer going to be referred to as Afro-Americans, because that's what they used to call us. And he said, Afro is a hairdo. This, again, you have to know how Jesse Jackson speaks. But African American speaks to our heritage. Well, the translator didn't get any of, And so I stepped in and because it was apparent to me in the first 30 seconds, this is going south 100 miles an hour, and there's no way that Jesse Jackson's word that's going into the press and there were television stations is going to be remembered where it wasn't making any sense. So I stepped in. I wanted to laugh, because again, I was 25. I wanted to laugh because the translation was really jacked up. That's a term I would use. But I stepped in and became his translator and was his translator for the rest of the trip, because I recognized at that moment that this iconic person needed to be heard. And if you don't have the right translation, then you're not going to get the message out. Mm-hmm. So that's memorable to me, because that's when I recognized Black ministers in this country, they speak that way, and he's a minister. But when you travel internationally, you must have somebody with you who knows how to translate your message. And I remembered saying, oh my God, this is the message. This is what I'm saying inside of me. Oh, and I just stepped up and I said, you know, I'm a lawyer, whatever you do. And I took my lawyer hat off, because some people, you know, get into thinking that being a lawyer is something great. Yeah, it is. You work hard for it. But at that moment, I stepped into the role of a translator, which is a noble profession, but it's not what I thought I was going to be doing, because I recognized otherwise his message would be completely distorted, and who knows what people would have just said, what is he saying? So that's one of the fondest memories I have. The funniest memories, probably because it happened the first time that I traveled with him and worked with him. But one of the things that I remember nowadays working with him is just his sense of humor and his undying fight for justice. He always shows up. He always, now he's held corporate America's feet to the fire in terms of opening up doors for Black and brown people. You know, Silicon Valley, opening up the doors for Black and brown people. And that's, by the way, whether you're Canadian or American or from the United States, it's opening up those doors, opening up the C-suites, opening up the boardrooms that don't have diverse representation. That's really, of the past 2 decades, what he's fought. Being a part of Black Lives Matter, he was the original person marching with Dr. King. You have to remember that. So 5 generations later, still transitioning and pivoting into today's world, and still that phrase that everyone associates with Jesse Jackson is keep hope alive. No matter how bad it is, keep hope alive. So I have like 32 years of history in the civil rights movement as his lawyer. So understand, as a lawyer, sometimes I have been out there protesting, like we protested against the South African embassy against apartheid when Nelson Mandela was in jail. It was in part, not exclusively, but in part the protest of people in the US, I believe, and in Canada too, that helped to bring down the apartheid regime. Global protests. So there's so many stories that I could tell about my work with Reverend Jesse Jackson. I've represented his family. I've represented the organization. You know, as a lawyer, sometimes you're behind the scenes. Now I'm chairman of the board of Rainbow Push Coalition. I never saw that coming. I thought I was going to do that one assignment in Gabon, 1988. That's it, be done. But then, you know, there were other assignments. You know, what about this issue? And because I had the pleasure back at that time in the 80s of representing foreign African governments and foreign governments in the Caribbean, we lobbied on their behalf, because I was in practice in DC. I lobbied on their behalf and things like that. I had to be up on the international issues. I had an international background prior to even going to Branksome. So it kind of was a nice fit for me. And Reverend Jackson just being, it's like either I followed him or he and his organizations followed me wherever I went and wherever I worked. So, you know, Maria, it's been great. And if ever you all have the opportunity to work alongside pro bono, it doesn't matter. You volunteer your time for icons who make a difference in the civil rights, human rights. Civil rights and human rights for me are synonymous movement. I would encourage you to do it.
With everything going on right now, I'm wondering if there's been like something specific on your hearts right now that maybe that you haven't shared yet that you'd be interested in sharing, just like anything that comes to mind.
Sometimes I live in fear.
Mm.
I live in fear.
Mm.
That's on my heart, on my mind. I admit that my sadness comes because I fear for my children.
Mm-hmm.
My boys got stopped by the police the other day, and 3 minutes, they were just driving to school. They go to a school much like Branksome, a private school here in the Atlanta metropolitan area. And my older one drives now, and his car, his dad got him, was in the shop, so he's driving my car, which is a sort of high-end sports utility BMW type thing. And as they're driving to their school, they get stopped. And of course, the first thing they do is they text me. And I'm on some Zoom, you know, you do it, all these Zoom to the Zoom calls. I'm on a Zoom call, but I always have my phone because I have children. And I see this text and I tell the people on the Zoom call, you know, I'll be right back. And I get off the Zoom call, and my older son says, Mommy, I've been stopped by the police. At that moment, I felt that there was a chance that not one child, but both of my children may not survive that experience. Just George Floyd was pulled over. That's here in Atlanta. All these people that you see They may have just been pulled over, parking ticket, whatever. And we have this expression in the US called just driving while Black. And so all the things that I've done as a lawyer, as a civil rights lawyer, fighting for people who have no voice, because I've done a lot of that, right there it hit home as I sat and prayed and I said, Lord, please just spare my children. I didn't know why they were pulled over. Just spare my children. That was 2 weeks ago. I'm kind of getting emotional. And so for you young ladies, you have to understand that sometimes I still get afraid. And let me tell you, I'm ferocious in a courtroom. No one can tell me a single thing. Nothing. I've earned the right to be there, and I'm going, if I have a chance, my goal is to beat you in court, to persuade a jury and to win for my client. That's what I love doing. But at that moment, it wasn't about that ferocious trial lawyer. It was about that mother getting a text from her child, and both my kids were texting me. My older one was like, Mommy, please don't be mad. I thought I was going to, because I don't know if he was speeding or whatever, but he actually wasn't speeding. But we got stopped by the police. And so I'm wondering why he's texting, because I've had that discussion with my children. Their dad has had it. Every man in their lives has had the discussion with them of what you do when you're stopped by the police, wherever you are, if you're Black. You put your hands on the dashboard, you don't move, you do exactly what the police ask you to do. You do not engage. I tell my kids, it's not the time for you to show how intellectually strong you are, how your mother's this, how your dad, forget all that. Because they don't care about that. And in a moment, they have a gun and can kill you. So just don't engage. Even if they slap you, if they beat you, just take it, because you have to live for me to help you. That's a conversation I have with my children. So at that moment, that 3 minutes, and my younger son, who's 16, my boys are, 6'3" and 6'5". They play, both of them, my younger one is a 4.0 student. My older one, not 4.0, but both of them play varsity football. They're big. But at that moment, I just prayed to God. I said, God, please don't let this be my narrative. Mm-hmm. But what I want you all to know is it could have been my narrative. It could have been my narrative. And you have to, and I'm reminded of that. And that's the tragedy of where we live now in this space. I really wish it weren't, because all the languages that I speak, all the extraordinary things some people think I've accomplished, all of the people who have poured into me, all of the privilege, Torie, to use your words, privilege that I've had. There's no question. I was educated in Swiss boarding schools. Privilege is the capital P. All of that meant nothing. It means nothing to me. Nothing to me if something happens to my child at the hands of the police. Nothing. It means nothing. So I didn't expect to go there, but since you asked the question, that's probably the most difficult thing for me to talk about.
Thank you for sharing.
And thank you for sharing. And it reminds me just how this is world's work. This is not the work in a position that we're in as leaders or where we stand, but this is the world's work that we do.
CK, your answer really hit home for me as well, because I have a brother who's also currently going to school in the United States. It's his last year and he goes to school in North Carolina. And it really, I feel like I talked about this before, but this is a point I wanted to reiterate. It doesn't matter that he's like a star debater. He does rugby. He's like an aspiring historian. Like all that stuff doesn't matter. Like when they see you, it's only like, they only see you as like another Black body. And this goes for all Black people, both Black men and women in the United States. No one is immune to that, potential of being a statistic or being seen as, violent. And I think what really gets me is just the people constantly try to find justification for the brutalization of Black people over and over again. And it's like, I'm tired of having to prove to people that it isn't justification that somebody had a counterfeit $20 bill to be killed, or it isn't justification that somebody ran with their back to the police and they deserve to be killed. It isn't justification that somebody even had a taser in their hands and then deserved to be shot. Like, I'm tired of having to explain the narrative to people that the police are not supposed to kill you regardless of what you have done. And I think it's very clear that there's a double standard of how police treat certain people who have committed crimes and who have killed people, which we saw in Kenosha with the 17-year-old who killed 2 people at protest, versus what we saw with George Floyd, all the other names on the list. So it's just really tiring and really personal. I have to see those kinds of stories being replayed over and over again, and then having people deny it and having people try to justify that violence. It's a lot.
I always love asking the question of what's on people's hearts, because I think so much we have to project so much strength and power, but while we move through the world, we carry so much on our hearts, and I think it's just so important every once in a while to just check in and make sure that that our hearts are being taken care of as well. So once again, just thank you so much for sharing. And I think my last words in terms of our talk, in terms of installation, in terms of Branksome girls, in terms of Branksome Black girls, like the phenomenal Maria here, I would just encourage Branksome to make sure that Black girls are able to be both Black and a woman at the same time within the space. Oftentimes within our leadership positions, we are incredible leaders, women, but maybe only just for Black History Month, then we're Black. And I think that a challenge that I put towards Branksome, and I actually talked about this with Lexi and Sophia in our article for the read, is creating spaces where young Black girls can be both Black and a woman and be able to release what's on their hearts, and feel safe, and feel like they belong, to be able to just kind of fully be themselves in a space that they love so much and that is their second home. So I just really wanted to conclude with those words and leave that maybe as a challenge for the Branksome community as we kind of move forward beyond this talk.
Mm-hmm. You know, as I step into this role, because it is a new role at the school as the head of diversity, equity, inclusion, it is on my heart that the stories that you shared today, the experiences that we know exist in the world, and that our ability to work together and be allies and truly transform the world, and I mean partner, to make change so that, so that our children and my son grows up in a different space, and that, Maria, that the world that you walk into looks different for your children as well, or your families, or wherever you go in that world. And same for you, Torie. So I as Branksome grows in this work, I believe we can do it. CK, you started the conversation saying that, you also have hope at this time. And I do think that this time has brought hope in a way that I have never seen before. And I do believe in the power of the students and the faculty and the employees at Branksome to really make this change, and that we're influencing many spaces and also independent schools more largely. So, I do feel transformation happens on many levels. So I hear you, my heart is with you, and it's the same work that I feel has to be done in so many levels in the school.
Mm-hmm.
Having the conversation is great. Being inclusive is great. And I'm very optimistic. I very optimistic. So I'm delighted to be a part of this conversation, and just delighted to share the stage with these two. I would call you all mini-me's. I was listening to you all and I was like, oh, that's so me. At least what I envisioned that I was at your age. But more importantly, it just makes me feel so good to see that Branksome continues to graduate young women of color who are leaders, who are out there and who are going to make a difference. There's just not even a question in my mind. There's not a question in my mind that you all are going to be those leaders that we're looking for. And that is very, very comforting. So, to Branksome, kudos again. To Torie and to Maria, kudos to you and to your parents. And remember, with adversity, with leadership comes adversity. And I think being in a space where you can be yourself whether it's at Branksome, whether it's, you know, in college, whether it's in graduate school, whether it's on your job, finding that space, because you have a whole other discussion about workplace bias. That's a whole nother discussion. Torie, you said you got to find a job. That's really, really interesting. But the same thing applies. The same things that have caused you all to be successful where you are now will allow you all to be successful down the line. This is great, Myra. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
really very much.
I want to thank everyone for their time and the privilege to just be together today and just, you know, share our thoughts together. So thank you, and thank you for just all you do every day in your lives as leaders in this work.